Every day I hear words like strategy, tactic, goal, and power get used wrong by friends, colleagues, news anchors, and even advocates that do this for a living. And it drives me nuts. Of course, my clients know the difference.
You have no idea how many screenshots of cable news I've gotten from Claire. Someone is saying strategy, and she sends me, "This is clearly a tactic." It's like watching campaign malpractice on the biggest of stages.
So after years of texts, phone calls, video chats, and yelling at the TV, we decided to do the only logical thing. Start a podcast. From our basements, like every other opinionated duo with a mic and some passion. I'm Claire Douglas, a strategist, campaigner, trainer, and a not-so-secret reality TV fanatic. While I love social movements, documentaries, and Bravo, Survivor uniquely combines both. It's a social experiment and a masterclass on strategy and power.
And I'm Tykee James, organizer, policy advocate, and relatively new to both Survivor and campaign work. I bring the questions and the occasional pun.
This podcast is for anyone trying to change anything, to build power, campaigners, citizen organizers, policy wonks, or anyone who's ever asked, wait, what's the difference between a goal and a strategy, or a strategy and a tactic? Because power isn't about money or titles. It's about making someone do something they otherwise wouldn't do. And we want more people to understand how that actually works.
Claire, why did we pick Survivor?
Because it is one of the longest running, most strategic reality shows in U.S. history. And it mirrors what campaigns look like. They're messy, relational, constantly evolving, just like democracy.
And today we're starting with one of the best, season 37, David versus Goliath, a fan favorite from 2018 and one of the most watched seasons ever.
And that title, David versus Goliath, you know, the one that you hear everywhere in politics, sports, court cases. People love to talk about it, but they usually get it wrong.
How so?
They frame David as a lucky underdog who pulled off a miracle. It was a 1 in 1,000 shot chance that they could win. But that's not what happened. The real story is about strategy, not luck.
Okay, so take us back to the Old Testament and bear with us, dear listeners, if you've heard this in Sunday school, temple, or English class. Claire, can you refresh our listeners on what actually happened?
Yeah, of course. So the Philistines, they are the established military superpower. They lined up against the Israelites. Instead of a full-scale war, they proposed a one-on-one duel. So the Philistines, they're Goliath's team. And the Israelites, that's the Davids. So out comes Goliath. He's massive, armored, sword in hand. His message was simple. We're stronger. Don't even try. But here's the twist. Scholars believe Goliath suffered from a condition which causes abnormal growth, but also limited vision and slow movement. He looked terrifying, but he was also slow, rigid, vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And if you remember Andre the Giant, the beloved wrestler, also actor in one of my favorite movies of all time, The Princess Bride, he had the same condition, and he died at 46, and that was from his, heart failure that was related to the condition.
I see. So the Philistines, that established military superpower, they picked a big, scary-looking show of force to physically dominate the battlefield.
Yeah, that's right. Their strategy was brute force. They depended on hand-to-hand combat. Their tactic was the sword. Again, assuming that they would have close proximity for that combat. They thought the Israelites would meet them on their terms. But the Israelites, they didn't take the bait. They picked David, a shepherd trained with just a slingshot. In ancient warfare, slingers weren't kids' toys. They were elite, long-range fighters, like snipers today. Roman generals wrote about their accuracy. Archaeologists have found sling bullets inscribed with taunts like, "Take this."
I see. So the slings were pretty good. If David didn't win a sword fight, how did he make sure that the sword wasn't part of the fight?
Great question. Through his tactic, the sling, which only worked because the strategy was clear. Don't get close. Use what you have. Strike where your opponent is weak. Okay, so let's map this out to the campaign world of things. You have Goliath. That represents your opposition's overall strategy. Big money, insider power, connections, paid politicians, etc. The sword, their tactic. They're lobbyists. They're legal, they're big legal teams. They're paid ads. They're PACs, whatever. David's your team. That's your campaign. Those are your constituents. The sling, well, that's your tactic. That's how you demonstrate your power, whether it's with lots of people who care or lots of people that care deeply enough and are willing to take action. But the real power move is changing the terms of the fight, because your opposition, they want the home field advantage. Their entire setup depends on you accepting their terms. When you don't fight on their terms, just like David, you don't have to take the bait.
Oh, yes. So that's the lesson, that David wasn't lucky. He was chosen because this specific tactic neutralized Goliath's strengths. His team understood power. They played to win, not to impress.
Yeah, and if you remember, Goliath was nearsighted. He probably didn't even see David coming. And this isn't just found in religious fables. Let's talk about something here at home in the U.S. Let's talk about the U.S. labor movement. In 1921, more than 10,000 coal miners in West Virginia launched the largest labor uprising in U.S. history. It was called the Battle of Blair Mountain. They lived under brutal conditions in company towns, surveilled constantly. Their Goliath, the mine owners, the sheriffs, the private detectives, even federal troops.
Oh, yes, I've heard about this. I remember reading about how the workers organized across towns and hollers in Appalachia. They would walk together, fighting side by side, wearing red bandanas around their necks, which is actually where the term redneck comes from. Imagine this, a multiracial army of working class resistance, literally and figuratively tied together by rednecks. And that's just so amazing, especially considering they weren't armed like the other side was, like their opposition was, that they knew the terrain, they had the numbers, and most importantly, they had each other.
Yeah, so they used the Appalachian ridges for cover. And even though the uprising was ultimately put down, it was a great example of how you can fail forward because it changed the trajectory of labor in America. Within a decade, we had the National Labor Relations Act.
And that's what strong strategy looks like. Local trust, shared risk, terrain-based tactics. Even if you lose the battle, you can still shift the war. And Claire, I'm sure that you have shifted some wars in your time.
Yeah, I've seen this in my own work. And one campaign I was working on was to pass some solar policy in a deep red state. And we got intel from the locals, right? The people that knew the terrain, that the Republican governor personally read every handwritten letter that came to his desk. That information was valuable. It was a resource to our campaign, and we knew we needed to use it. So we built handwritten letters into our campaign plan. We set goals to get 20 letters every week from real constituents, not mass emails, not templated forms, just real people telling their stories. And guess what? He read them. He shifted his views. He signed the bill. And years later, he's still a vocal supporter of solar. Granted, this was just one of many tactics we executed, but it is an example of picking the right tactic at the right time for the right target.
That's the sling. Not flashy, not random, tailored, precise, and devastatingly effective.
Fast forward to today, Ukraine resisting the Russian invasion. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022, most analysts predicted Ukraine would fall in a matter of days. U.S. intelligence reportedly thought Kyiv would collapse in 72 hours. Why? Because Russia looked like Goliath. More troops, more tanks, more money, more firepower. Ukraine, by contrast, was framed as disorganized, underfunded, and politically unstable.
So basically, the world saw a classic David versus Goliath context that came from the Cold War image of the Soviet Union being strong, tough, and unbeatable.
And Ukraine flipped the script. Instead of collapsing, they redefined the fight. Their initial strategy was simple: survive, hold Kyiv, deny Russia a quick win. And once they stopped the momentum, they shifted to precision strikes, drone warfare, ambush tactics, and counteroffensives that retook other territories. They didn't try to match tank for tank. They went asymmetric, hit logistics, supply chains, and command posts. They used drones, not just for surveillance, but for kamikaze strikes deep inside Russia. Naval drones even push the Russian Black Sea Fleet back. And if you don't know, that's a big deal.
Well, and there you go again. That's David's sling. Not size, speed, accuracy, and innovation.
And beyond the battlefield, Ukraine waged an information war just as strategically. Remember those videos of Ukrainian grandmothers making Molotov cocktails? Or Zelensky in a hoodie saying, "I'm staying." That wasn't random. That was narrative power. And here's one of the most fascinating tactics I've found. They treated captured Russian soldiers with kindness. They gave them tea, food, phone calls to home. Video circulated not to humiliate them, but to show humanity.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful. Instead of brutality, they used compassion as a weapon, as a counteroffensive, if you will.
Yeah, and I will. That's right. It undercut Russian propaganda that painted Ukrainians as Nazis or monsters. It also planted doubt back in Russia. Families saw their sons alive, but not demoralized, and Russian soldiers began to see surrender as safer than fighting. That strategy layered into every level, militarily, psychologically, and morally. And here's the contrast. While Ukraine uses humane treatment of prisoners of war as both a psychological and a propaganda weapon, Russia's approach has often been violent, dehumanizing, and criminal. That difference not only isolated Russia's diplomacy, but hardens Ukrainian resistance at home.
So Ukraine wasn't just fighting with tanks and drones. They had a battle on two fronts where they were also using and wielding weapons of propaganda and narrative and being quite successful.
Yeah, and that's why Ukraine has lasted years, not days. They prepared after 2014, modernized their forces, built networks with NATO, sure. But because they framed the conflict as democracy versus authoritarianism, they secured and sustained Western aid and global sympathy.
Being underestimated can be an advantage. If you can change the terrain, redefine the fight, and use what you've got in ways your opposition has never expected, you're not an underdog. You're ready to win.
Yeah, and David has a chance when we stop mimicking Goliath's power and start wielding our own. So here's the fundamental lesson. David should and can always win. Not by mimicking Goliath's power, but by reimagining it. By using what you already have to get what you want.
And that's true in ancient battles, on Survivor, and in every campaign. If you want to change something, be an effective organization or campaigner, not the underdog, you've got to design the fight, not just walk into it.
And we'll demystify what it means to be in the fight. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't the fight itself. It's about surviving long enough to fight at all. Burnout, hidden advantages, knowing when to play your idol, and more.
And that brings us to our first power move. Ask yourself, who's your Goliath? What do they assume you'll do? Where are they vulnerable, rigid, slow, or blind?
And then flip it. What do you have that they don't see coming? Your lived experience, your community's shared history, a powerful story that inspires action, or even a procedural tool you've overlooked, or it doesn't even exist yet, but it should. That's your sling.
And we've got a worksheet to help you map out your own Goliath audit. It's on our Substack at newfundamentals.substack.com.
And remember, David changed the terrain. He picked the tactic, he made it count, and that's strategy. That's power, and that's how you win.
If you got thoughts on today's episodes or ideas for future ones, email us at hello@newfundamentals.com. We want to hear your campaign stories, your questions, and the Goliaths you're facing now.
And don't forget, hit follow or subscribe when you listen, and leave us a review. That's how more average people, grandmothers, organizers, advocates, and curious folks find us.
So whether you're holding your slingshot, your hidden idol, or solidarity with your community, remember, the real win comes from strategy.
And that's how we outwit, outplay, and
And
outorganize. See you next time.
See ya!